She had no idea that my 15 years of quiet record-keeping, every receipt, every wire transfer, every signed acknowledgement she had handed me without reading, would one day be laid across a conference table in a law office in Portland, Oregon, and that the woman who had spent 2 decades calling me the difficult one would sit across from me and not be able to say a single word. My name is Miriam Calloway. I am 39 years old. I am a forensic accountant. And this is the story of the day I stopped protecting people who had never once protected my daughter. My daughter Nora was born with a bicuspid aortic valve. That is what the cardiologist at OHU, Oregon Health and Science University, told me when Nora was 11 days old, her fingers curled around my thumb in the NICU, her chest moving in a way that did not look quite right to anyone who knew what to look for. The valve was not immediately dangerous. It was the kind of thing you watched, you monitored, you planned for, and you saved money. I had been saving since she was 3 months old, a separate account, a high-yield savings vehicle. Every month, an automatic transfer of $250. By the time Nora was 6, I had $32,000 in that account, earmarked for the open heart procedure her cardiologist estimated she would need between the ages of 9 and 13. Depending on how the valve progressed. I told my mother about it once, just once, when Nora was about 4, and my mother had asked why I never spent money on anything nice for myself. I'm saving for Nora's surgery, I said. My mother set down her coffee cup, tilted her head in that way she had, the way that was not quite sympathy and not quite dismissal, and said, "Oh, I'm sure it won't come to that." I did not argue. I did not explain further. I went home and transferred an extra $50 into the account. That is who I was. That is who I had always been. The one who planned, who documented, who did not raise her voice, who absorbed the ambient noise of our family and converted it quietly into preparation. My sister Denise was the other kind. Denise was the daughter who called our parents every evening at 7, who spent holidays in the kitchen with our mother, laughing over old photographs, who had been, since the moment she was born 3 years after me, the emotional center of our family's universe. She was not cruel. That is important to say. Denise was not a villain in the way that word usually implies. She was simply someone who had been handed every soft landing our parents could provide, and she had never had any reason to question whether those landings were hers alone to use. Our parents, Gerald and Patrice Holloway, now both retired, living in a 3-bedroom ranch house in Beaverton, Oregon, loved both of their daughters. I believe that. I believed it then. But love, as I learned slowly and at some cost, is not the same thing as equity. When I graduated from Portland State with my accounting degree, my parents gave me a card with $100 inside. When Denise graduated from the same school 4 years later with a degree in communications, my parents threw her a catered party for 60 guests and paid the down payment on her first car. I told myself it did not matter. She was the baby. She had always been a little more celebrated. That was family. When I was 24 and living in a studio apartment in Northeast Portland, working double shifts to build my forensic accounting certification while raising Nora on my own, her father had left when she was 7 months old, quietly, without incident, the way some men do. My parents occasionally sent $50 gift cards. Christmas, Nora's birthday, little gestures. When Denise was 24, they co-signed her apartment lease and paid 3 months of her rent while she found her footing. I told myself it did not matter. I was 32 when I joined the firm of Halcourt and Brennan, a mid-sized forensic accounting firm with a strong presence in estate disputes and financial fraud investigations. I was good at my work. Precise, patient, meticulous. The qualities that made me unremarkable at family dinners made me unusually effective in rooms where spreadsheets told the truth and people did not. Within 2 years, I had been promoted to senior associate. Within 4, I was handling cases independently valued at over $12 million. I did not tell my family what I made. It had never seemed like information they would receive quietly. Nora, meanwhile, was growing. She was curious and careful and told her pediatric cardiologist that she wanted to be an engineer when she grew up, because engineers fix things. Her valve was progressing. The monitoring visits had moved from annually to every 6 months. Her cardiologist, Dr. Andrea Faust, had begun the language of scheduling, careful, hedging language, but still a kind of calendar forming. Probably within the next 2 or 3 years, she said at Nora's most recent appointment, when Nora was 7. We should be ready. I was ready. The account had grown. I had added to it steadily, and by Nora's 7th birthday, there was $61,000 set aside. That number is important. Hold it. And then my sister got engaged. Denise called me on a Tuesday evening in late October. I was at my desk, annotating a trust agreement, a cold cup of tea beside me. She was radiant even through the phone. I could hear it, that particular brightness in her voice that meant the world was arranging itself around her comfort. Marcus proposed, she said. Last night, on the rooftop of the Heathman. Congratulations, I said. And I meant it. I genuinely meant it. We're thinking next October, beautiful. Maybe 200 people. Mom already has ideas. I set down my pen. That's wonderful. Denise, Miriam. Her voice softened, took on a particular texture I recognized, the texture of a request being prepared. I know you're not exactly the celebratory type, but this is really important to me. I need my sister. I'm here, I said. Mom and Dad want to help pay, but Marcus's family is being complicated about money. There was a small pause. Anyway, we'll figure it out. I just wanted you to know first. We said goodnight. I picked up my pen. I made a small note in the margin of the trust agreement. Something about a discrepancy in a date, a thing I would need to follow up on. And then I finished my tea and went to bed. That was October. The hospital would call in February. But something happened in November that I did not yet know about. Something had already been decided. There is a particular kind of silence that exists in families where one child has always been the axis. It is not hostile silence. It is the silence of things assumed. The silence of choices made so reflexively by people who love you that the choices never feel like choices at all. They feel like weather. The call came on a Wednesday morning in February, while I was in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Portland, reviewing a preliminary financial audit with 2 colleagues. My phone buzzed against the table. I glanced at the screen. OHCU Children's Heart Center. I excused myself quietly, stepped into the hallway and answered. It was the scheduler's office. Nora's case had been reviewed by the surgical team. Dr. Faust had submitted the recommendation. They were looking at a window in late April, 12 weeks out, for the procedure. Could I come in Thursday for a pre-surgical consultation? Yes, I said. Of course. I thanked the woman, ended the call, and stood in the hallway for a moment. The lights hummed. Someone walked past with a paper cup of coffee. I could smell it. Dark roast, slightly burnt. I thought 12 weeks. I thought $61,000. I thought we are ready. I went back into the conference room. I apologized for the interruption. I returned to the audit. That evening, after Nora was asleep, she had just turned 8, and she still slept with a worn stuffed rabbit named Gerald, which she had named at age 3 for reasons she no longer remembered. I sat at my kitchen table in our apartment in the Selwood neighborhood and opened my laptop to the savings account, the account that held $61,000, except that it did not hold $61,000, it held $412. I sat very still for a moment. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed on the wet street. I clicked through to the transaction history. There were 2 withdrawals, both from November, both within the same week. The first, $30,000. The second, $28,400, both authorized, both bearing my signature, except that I had not signed them. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I thought about the account structure. I had opened this account at a regional bank, Pacific Community Savings, a mid-sized institution in the Portland metro area. And I had been its sole account holder since Nora was an infant, but when Nora was 2, during a period when I was working excessive hours and had briefly, foolishly, worried about what would happen to the account if something happened to me, I had added my mother as a secondary authorized signatory, not a joint account owner, a signatory. A person who could transact in an emergency. She had never used it. In 6 years, she had never touched it. Until November, I did not call my mother that night. I sat at the table. I opened a blank document on my laptop. I began writing down what I knew. Account balance as of October 31. 61,042.17. 31,042.17. Account balance as of November 18, 2,641.30. Current balance, 412. I wrote down the dates. I wrote down the amounts. I wrote down the phrase unauthorized by account primary holder. And then I paused and I thought about what the word unauthorized would actually mean, legally, given that my mother held signatory rights. I closed the laptop. I went to bed. I did not sleep. I called my mother the next morning from my car before driving Nora to school. I saw the account, I said. There was a pause, not a guilty pause. A resigned one. The pause of someone who had known this conversation was coming and had decided how to have it. I was going to tell you, she said. When, after the wedding, when things settled down, I kept my voice level. Nora's surgery is scheduled for April, Mom. The wedding is in October. You have time to rebuild it. I absorbed that. You took $60,000 from my daughter's medical fund to pay for Denise's wedding. It's not $60,000. It's $58,000, roughly. And the rest? The rest we're still working out. She paused again. Miriam, you have a good salary. You can save quickly. Denise doesn't have what you have. Marcus's family wasn't contributing the way they said they would, and we promised her a beautiful day. We couldn't just let her down. You let Nora down. Nora is 8. She doesn't understand weddings. She doesn't understand what this means to her aunt. I sat in the car in the school parking lot. Nora had gone inside. I watched the door swing closed behind her. I understand, I said. You always do this, my mother said, her voice shifting slightly. A small tightening, the beginning of the tone she used when she felt that I was about to make things uncomfortable. You make everything so measured, so clinical. Can you just, for once, be a human being about this? Your sister is getting married. I understand. I said it again. I ended the call. I drove to work. 3 days later, I drove to my parents' house in Beaverton. It was a Sunday. My father was in the garage. My mother was in the kitchen. Denise was there too. I had not been told she would be there, but there she was, sitting at the table with a binder of wedding samples, cream fabric swatches, invitation mock-ups, photographs of floral arrangements. She looked up when I came in. Her expression was careful. Miriam, she said. My mother set down a dish towel. She knows, she said to Denise. Not an apology. A status update. Denise looked at me. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't know she was going to use that account specifically. I just told them I needed help and they… I know, I said. It'll be fine, you have time to. I need it back, I said. Not loudly. Not with any particular heat. I need the money returned to that account before April. My mother's chin rose slightly. My father appeared in the doorway from the garage, wiping his hands on a cloth, having heard the tone of the conversation. We don't have it, my mother said. It's already been spent. The deposit on the venue, the caterer, the photographer. It's committed. Committed, I repeated. Miriam. My father spoke then, carefully, with the practiced gentleness of a man who had long operated as the family's mediator. We know this is hard, but we'll help you with Nora. We can help you fundraise. We can look into payment plans with the hospital. I looked at him for a long moment. I'm going to need a written accounting of where the money went, I said. Every vendor, every amount. My mother's eyes narrowed. This isn't an audit, Miriam. No, I agreed. It isn't. I looked at the wedding binder on the table, at the cream swatches and the photographs of flowers, at my sister's face, which held genuine remorse, and also beneath it, the expectation that this would resolve itself the way things in our family always resolve themselves, in Denise's favor, eventually, without requiring Denise to actually give anything back. All right, I said. I picked up my coat. I walked to the front door. I opened it. Miriam. My mother's voice followed me. Don't make this into something it isn't. I stepped outside. The door closed behind me. The air smelled like rain. I walked to my car. I sat in it for a moment without starting the engine. I thought about the blank document on my laptop at home. The one I had already begun to fill. Some people mistake your silence for surrender. They do not realize it is simply the sound of someone beginning to read. Then I started the car and I drove home to my daughter. The name of the attorney was Delphine Marsh. She was a partner at Marsh & Ogilvy, an estate and civil litigation firm in Lake Oswego, and she had been recommended to me by a colleague at Helcourt and Brennan, who described her as the kind of lawyer who doesn't raise her voice because she doesn't need to. I had first retained her services 2 years earlier, not for anything involving my family, but for the drafting and registration of Nora's medical trust. That is the first detail that matters. When Nora was 6, 2 years before the call from OHU, 4 years before this moment, I had worked with Delphine to establish a standalone irrevocable medical trust for Nora, funded by a designated insurance settlement from a minor automobile accident, and structured to hold and distribute funds specifically for Nora's cardiac care. The trust held $47,000. It was entirely separate from the Pacific Community Savings Account. The Pacific Community Savings Account, the one my mother had emptied, was a secondary reserve, a buffer. But the trust was the foundation, and the trust had never been touched, and my mother did not know it existed. I had never mentioned it. There had been no reason to. I called Delphine the Monday after the Beaverton visit. "I need to discuss 2 things," I said. "A civil matter involving unauthorized transactions and a review of Nora's trust adequacy, given the updated surgical timeline." "Come in Thursday," she said. I sat across from Delphine in her office, on the 3rd floor of a limestone building, 2 blocks from the Willamette River. The office smelled of cedar and paper. There was a framed watercolor of the coast above the credenza. She was 51, tall, with close-cropped silver hair and reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she had the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades in rooms where composure was the most powerful tool available. I laid the transaction history on her desk. She looked at it for a long time without speaking. "Your mother is an authorized signatory," she said finally. "Yes, that complicates civil recovery, but it doesn't eliminate it. If you can demonstrate that the funds were held for a specific purpose, medical care for a minor, and that the signatory had knowledge of that purpose, you have grounds for a claim under Oregon's financial elder abuse statutes. Inverted, meaning you would be the protected party, and the argument would center on breach of fiduciary trust." She looked over her glasses at me. "You're a forensic accountant." "Yes. Do you have documentation of the account's stated purpose?" I opened my bag and withdrew a folder. Inside, the original account application on which I had written, in the memo field, "Medical Reserve, Nora Calloway Cardiac Fund." A printed email from me to my mother from 6 years prior, in which I had written, "I'm adding you as a signatory in case of emergency. Please only use this for Nora's surgery costs." My mother had replied, "Of course. I hope we never need to." Also in the folder, 3 years of bank statements showing consistent, regular, small deposits. The pattern of someone saving deliberately, not casually. Delphine looked through the folder. A small silence moved through the room. "This is good," she said. "I know," I said. "I'll be honest with you, Miriam. Civil recovery takes time. You may not have it before April." "I know that too, but Nora's trust covers the procedure. I've verified with OHU's billing office. The trust, combined with Nora's secondary insurance, covers the surgical fees in full. There will be out-of-pocket costs for follow-up care, rehabilitation, monitoring, but the procedure itself is funded." Delphine looked at me steadily. "So Nora is taken care of." "Nora has always been taken care of." "Then, what do you need from me?" I folded my hands in my lap. "I need you to send a demand letter to my parents, requesting full restitution of $58,400 within 30 days. I need the letter of the Oregon statute, the account documentation, and the email chain. I need it sent certified mail, and if they don't respond within 30 days, then I need to know what comes next." Delphine picked up her pen. "I can have the letter drafted by Friday." I nodded. "There's a second matter." She looked up. "My grandmother," I said. "I need to tell you about my grandmother, Clara Holloway." Clara had died 14 months earlier, in January of the prior year, at the age of 83. She had lived her final decade in a care facility in Tigard, Oregon, where I had visited her every 2 weeks without exception. Through busy seasons at work, through weather, through the years when Nora was very small, and coming along meant managing a toddler in a facility corridor, my parents visited her monthly, sometimes less. Denies visited at holidays. Clara had noticed this. Clara was sharp, sharper than her family gave her credit for. She had been a bookkeeper for 40 years, a woman who had managed the finances of a mid-sized construction company in Eugene, and she had the temperament of someone who made decisions based on pattern, not sentiment. In the last 2 years of her life, she had changed her estate documents. I knew this because she had told me. On a Tuesday afternoon in November, 14 months before the current moment, sitting in her room at the facility, with a small radio playing jazz and a cup of tea going cold on the side table, she had reached across and taken my hand. "I changed the will," she had said. "Clara, don't Clara me, I've been watching. For a long time." She squeezed my hand once and released it. "You've been here, you and Nora. You've been here." I had not asked what she meant by the change. I had not asked for specifics. I had told her that her visits meant everything to Nora, and that I hoped she felt well cared for, and she had said, "I do." And we had listened to the jazz together for a while, and that had been that. She had passed away 8 weeks later. The estate had gone to probate. I had been contacted by an estate attorney named Raymond Seal, who had informed me that I was named as a beneficiary. I had assumed it was a modest bequest, a piece of jewelry perhaps, or a small account. I had signed the paperwork as requested. I had not yet received anything, I had not pressed, but I had spoken with Raymond Seal 3 weeks ago, after the February call from OHSU, because it had occurred to me to ask whether the estate had been settled. It had not. There was a complication. The complication was my parents. Delphine had handled estates for 30 years, and she knew Raymond Seal professionally. She made a call while I sat in her office. She held the phone with one hand and her pen with the other, and she listened for a long time. When she hung up, she was quiet for a moment. "Your grandmother's estate," she said carefully, "has been held in probate for 14 months because your parents filed a challenge to the will." I was still. "The challenge alleges undue influence," Delphine continued. "Their position is that you, as a frequent visitor in her final years, unduly influenced your grandmother to alter the distribution of her estate in your favor." "What is the distribution?" Delphine looked at her notepad. "The estate, including the sale proceeds from Clara's home in Eugene, her retirement accounts, and 2 commercial properties she held in Lane County, totals approximately $1.4 million. She paused. "She left 60% to you. The remaining 40 is split equally between your parents and Denise." I sat with that $1.4 million. 60%. I thought about the jazz on the radio, the cold tea, the small squeeze of my grandmother's hand. I thought about every visit, every Tuesday. For 10 years, I thought about my parents challenging the will of their own mother because her choices did not align with what they expected to receive. I thought about my mother, in November, drawing $60,000 from my daughter's surgical fund to pay for flowers and a photographer. I thought about the voice onto the phone saying, "You have time to rebuild it." I said nothing for a moment. The cedar smell of the office settled around us. A boat moved on the river 2 blocks away, visible through the window. "What is the status of the challenge?" I said. "Raymond says it's weak. The will was drafted by independent counsel. Your grandmother had 2 independent witnesses, a signed statement of testamentary capacity from her physician, and, this matters, a recorded video statement she made at the time of signing." Delphine looked over her glasses. "Raymond says she specifically mentions, on the recording, that her decision is based on personal observation of each family member's conduct over a period of years, and that she is acting without any external pressure or influence. She planned it," I said quietly, very carefully. Delphine set down her pen. "The challenge is holding up probate, but Raymond believes it will fail. Could be another 6 to 9 months before you see the funds. That's after April." "Yes, that's fine." I looked at the watercolor of the coast above the credenza. The water in the painting was gray-green and still. "Send the demand letter, and let's prepare a response to the probate challenge." There is a kind of reckoning that comes not in fire but in paperwork, not in a scene but in a line of text on a certified document that arrives on a Tuesday morning and cannot be ignored. The demand letter arrived at my parents' home on a Thursday. My mother called me that same afternoon. Her voice was a frequency I had not heard before. Not angry, exactly, but compressed, as if she were holding something tightly that she had not expected to need to hold. "You hired a lawyer," she said. "Yes, over family money, over my daughter's surgical fund." "Miriam." A long pause. "Do you understand what this will do to us? To this family? If this goes to court, it will not need to go to court if the money is returned within 30 days. We don't have it. That is not my problem to solve." A silence. Then, very quietly, "How could you do this?" Not a question. A statement. The statement of someone who had expected, as they had always expected, that I would eventually fold. That I would measure the cost of the conflict against the cost of the loss and choose, as I had always chosen, the cheaper path. "I have to go," I said. "I need to pick up Nora." I ended the call. Nora's surgery was on a Tuesday in late April. She went in at 6 in the morning, wearing a hospital gown printed with small blue stars. She had brought Gerald the rabbit. She had asked the anesthesiologist 3 careful questions about the procedure, which the anesthesiologist answered with what I recognized as genuine respect for the seriousness of an 8-year-old who wanted to understand what was happening to her body. The surgery took 6 hours and 40 minutes. I sat in the waiting room with a book I did not read and a cup of coffee that went cold in my hand, and I thought about nothing in particular. Just the small sounds of the hospital around me, the hum of climate control, the soft shoes of nurses, the occasional announcement over an intercom. Dr. Faust came out at noon. She was still in surgical scrubs. She was smiling. "She did beautifully," she said. I set the coffee cup down on the table beside me. My hand was entirely steady. "Thank you," I said. "The most important things in your life will often happen in the quietest rooms, in the most ordinary light." Nora spent 4 days in the hospital and came home on a Saturday morning in early May. She came home to the Selwood apartment, which by that point I had already given notice on, because by May I had received word from Raymond Seal that the probate challenge filed by parents had been dismissed. The Lane County Circuit Court had reviewed the challenge and found insufficient evidence of undue influence. The video statement. Clara, composed and deliberate on the screen, speaking directly to camera in the clear specific language of a woman who had spent 40 years keeping books and making decisions, had been, according to Raymond, the decisive factor. The judge had called it unambiguous. The estate was settled 3 weeks later. On the morning the funds were transferred, I was sitting at my kitchen table eating toast with Nora, who was recovering well and had developed, during her convalescence, a new interest in asking how bridges were engineered. She had been reading a library book about suspension cables. She had several questions. I answered what I could. I told her she would figure out the rest. My phone showed a notification from the estate account. I looked at it once and set the phone face down on the table. $840,000. The demand letter resolution had not gone smoothly. My parents had not returned the money within 30 days. They had hired their own attorney, a solo practitioner in Beaverton, who, according to Delphine, had advised them to dispute the claim on the grounds that the signatory authorization constituted implicit consent to use the funds. It was not a strong argument. Delphine had documented the explicit, written, email-verified limitation on the authorization carefully. But it extended the timeline, and it cost both sides money and fees, and it introduced into the formal record the full history of the account. Its stated purpose, its consistent deposits, the email chain, the medical documentation of Nora's condition, the OHU surgical scheduling. When the mediation session was scheduled for July, I drove to the office in Lake Oswego and sat at a long table across from my parents and their attorney. My parents looked older than I had been expecting. My father had lost weight. My mother's expression when she looked at me was something I could not name, not remorse, not defiance. Something complicated and tired. Delphine laid the documents on the table in the methodical sequence we had prepared: the account application, the email, the transaction records, the medical records showing the established fund purpose, the probate dismissal documents, a brief summary of the estate settlement, and a single-page financial projection showing what Nora's ongoing cardiac monitoring would cost over the next 10 years. My mother's eyes moved across the document slowly. Then Delphine set down one more document, a statement from Pacific Community Savings indicating that, as part of the estate settlement, I had transferred sufficient funds to fully endow Nora's medical trust through her 18th birthday, rendering the original savings account and the missing $60,000 a fraction of what now existed in Nora's name. My mother looked at that document for a long time. "She doesn't need it back," my mother said quietly to her attorney. "Not to me. She already has. She doesn't need it." "This is not about need," Delphine said pleasantly. "It is about authorization, stated purpose, and the protection of a minor's designated medical fund." The room was quiet. A clock ticked somewhere. The weight of a manila folder shifted on the table as someone's hand moved. My father looked at me directly then. For the first time since the process had begun, he looked at me the way a person looks at another person when they have run out of angles and arguments and are simply left with what is true. "I'm sorry," he said, quietly, plainly. I looked at him for a moment. "I know," I said. The mediation concluded with a structured repayment agreement. 36 months, interest included, drawn from my parents' retirement income. It was not the fastest resolution, but it was documented, it was enforceable, and it was real. In September, Nora and I moved. I had purchased a house in the Eastmoreland neighborhood of Portland, 3 bedrooms, a quiet street, a backyard with an old apple tree that Nora immediately began referring to as our tree. The house was 840 square feet. It had a covered porch and good light in the kitchen, and hardwood floors that creaked in one specific place near the hallway. A creak that I found, after a week, that I had already come to consider part of the texture of home. I had purchased it outright. I had left Halcourt and Brennan the previous spring and spent the summer formalizing my own practice. Callaway Forensic Consulting, registered in Oregon, with a focus on estate disputes and financial trust litigation. I had 3 clients by September and had already been approached by a 4th through a referral from Delphine. I was, by any measure, fine. Denise called me in October. The week of her wedding, which had taken place as planned. The venue, the caterer, the 200 guests. She called me because I had not attended. I had sent a card and a modest gift. I had wished her well, but I had declined the invitation, and I had not explained why at any length, because the explanation seemed, by then, unnecessary. "I just wanted you to know," Denise said on the call, "that I'm sorry. I've been thinking about it since February. Since before that. I should have said something. When Mom told me what she'd done, I didn't know it was your surgical account. But I should have asked more questions." I sat on the covered porch of the Eastmoreland house, a mug of tea in my hand. It was early evening. The apple tree in the backyard had gone orange and amber. The air smelled of leaves and the particular sharpness of October in the Pacific Northwest. "I know," I said. "Are you okay? Is Nora?" "Nora is well. She had her 3-month post-surgical follow-up last week. Dr. Faust is very pleased with the repair. Nora has been asking about bridge engineering." A small sound from Denise, half a laugh, half something else. "That sounds right." A quiet moment settled between us. "I don't know what we are now," Denise said. "As sisters, I don't know what you want us to be." "I don't know yet either," I said, "but I think that's an honest place to start." We said goodnight. I sat on the porch a while longer. The apple tree moved slightly in the evening wind. The creak of the house behind me was faint and familiar. I thought about 10 years of Tuesday visits to a care facility in Tigard, about a woman with a background in bookkeeping and a clear eye for pattern, who had watched her family arrange itself around a center of gravity she had not chosen, and who had, in the end, made her own ledger. Who had watched, and recorded, and decided, and trusted that the record would speak. I thought about Nora at 8 years old, asking the anesthesiologist 3 careful questions in a hospital gown printed with blue stars. I thought about what it means to prepare quietly, in a world that celebrates loudness. The repayment from my parents arrived every month, as scheduled. I placed each payment directly into Nora's trust, compounding what was already there. I did not track it with satisfaction. It was simply a number, moving from one place to another, the way numbers do. My firm grew. By the following spring, I had 7 clients and a part-time associate. I worked from a converted study in the Eastmoreland house on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and I picked Nora up from school on Tuesdays at 3, and we often spent those evenings on the porch. Her with a library book, me with a file, the apple tree doing whatever apple trees do in the slow transition between seasons. In March, Raymond Seal called to let me know that the final probate matter, a minor administrative item related to the commercial properties in Lane County, had been resolved. The properties had been sold. The proceeds had been distributed. That's the end of it, he said. Thank you, Raymond, I said. I closed the file. Patience is not passive. It is the most active thing there is. The act of holding a position while the world arranges itself into truth. My parents, over time, found their way to something like a reckoning. Not a dramatic one, not the kind that arrives in a scene. My father drove to Eastmoreland one afternoon in November, called first, asked if he could come, arrived with a small plant for the porch, and stayed for about an hour. We talked about Nora mostly. About her school, about the bridge book she had graduated to, which was now a book about structural engineering, about how she had begun to have opinions about cantilevers. He looked, sitting at my kitchen table, like a man who understood something he had not understood before, and was carrying the weight of that understanding without asking me to lift it for him. I made him tea. I showed him the apple tree. He said, "Your grandmother knew what she was doing." She always did, I said. My mother and I spoke on the phone every few weeks. The calls were shorter than they once were, and also, in some way, more honest. She did not ask me to measure what had happened against what we owed each other as family. She did not ask me to fold. And I did not ask her to be someone she was not. We were, perhaps, learning the shape of what was possible. Denise and I met for coffee in January. She was several months into her marriage. She seemed genuinely happy. We talked for an hour and a half. We did not resolve everything. We were not supposed to. We were 2 women learning to see each other without the distortion of old roles and old assumptions, and that kind of seeing takes time. We scheduled another coffee for February. Nora's 18-month post-surgical follow-up was in October of the following year. She sat in the examination room in her regular clothes, a striped sweater, worn sneakers, and answered Dr. Faust's questions with the directness she had always had. The valve repair was holding well. The monitoring interval was extended to annually. "You have a very healthy heart," Dr. Faust told her. Nora considered this. "It was fixed correctly," she said. Dr. Faust looked at me over Nora's head and smiled. We drove home through the wet October streets. Nora was quiet for a few blocks, looking out the window at the passing houses and their turned trees. "Mom," she said, were you scared when I had the surgery?" I thought about the waiting room, the cold coffee, the book I had not read, the steady hand when I put down the cup. "I was prepared," I said. She thought about that for a moment. "That's the same thing," she said. I looked at the road ahead, at the wet red-orange leaves on the pavement, at the ordinary October light coming through the clouds. "Yes," I said. "I suppose it is. They gave away what was not theirs to give, and in doing so they made visible every invisible thing I had built. The record had always been there. I had simply kept it. And that was the day I understood that silence is not absence. It is the most careful kind of presence. The presence of someone who has been watching, and noting, and waiting for the truth to need a place to land. It always does."